So this is what my week looks like. We take Mondays off. Sylvia and I and the rest of the staff works on Mondays, and then they take Fridays off, and we work on Fridays. And so Tuesday and Wednesday, I'll take appointments, counseling sessions, things like that. And so I try to protect Thursday and Friday to kind of get honed in and finish my sermon and get everything ready for Sunday. And what I do is a lot of times I will put do not disturb signs on my doors. I've got an exterior door and an interior office door because once I kind of get in the zone, I don't want to be bothered. And Sylvia knows that, so she's like a watchdog, boy. She takes care of me and makes sure I don't get bothered. But on Thursday, the phone rings at the office and I'm eavesdropping. I usually have, some ambient music, just kind of chilling in my office. And I heard her tone change on the phone. I thought, uh-oh, what's going on? So I listened more intently. And apparently the guy on the other end says, hey, I need to speak to the head hog at the trough. And she goes, sir, if you're referring to the pastor, we don't call him the head hog at the trough. She says, we call him pastor, we call him Tracy, we call him PT, but we don't call him the head hog at the trough. And apparently this guy goes, well, I spoke with him last week. I'm the guy that has a $10,000 donation that I'd like to make to the church for the building fund. She goes, oh, hold on. I think I see the fat pig coming through the door right now. All about the building fund. We've been talking about random acts of giving versus becoming or being a generous person, right? And it's a great series. I've enjoyed it. It's challenged me and stretched me out of my comfort zone a little bit. Everybody gives, we've discovered. Everybody gives, but this is about doing something versus becoming or being something. So giving and being generous are two different things. So this series is about how to be generous, and we've covered a whole lot of material in a short period of time. And if you're a guest here today, let me just say you're going to walk away from this single sermon that you've dropped in on, and you're going to walk out of here, you're going to go, dang gummit, another church that's all about the money. No, you're going to take this out of context because you missed the first two sermons. This church is not all about the money. We do believe the Bible addresses it, and that we believe we have to have a plan. So what I would ask you to do before you go give us bad reviews, because some of you will do that on Google or Facebook or whatever you do, go listen to the first two sermons at crosspoint.church, and it gives you context, and you will discover that we're about being generous, not just inside the four walls of this church, but outside, making a difference in the world. And we want to become generous people. All of us are stretching and trying to become generous people. So if you don't go back and listen, you're going to take it out of context, but everybody else, you're up to speed. And I want you to lean into this sermon today as we kind of do a real quick review, and then we'll jump into the meat of the message. Again, most Americans, Canadians, and Europeans, they know how to give, but they don't know how to be generous, and certainly don't understand a life that's built around generosity and the benefit to living their life that way. We've been covering a whole lot of material here. This series has not been about something that you do on occasion, but it's about someone that you become, that you begin to be a person, a generous person. Generosity, we've said, is more than just random acts of giving. Generous people have a plan, and today I'm going to talk to you about that plan. So at the very beginning, several weeks back, my promise to you was this. When you become generous, you will give more, save more, and consume less. You will give more, save more, and consume less. But in case that promise didn't do it for you, I told you that Jesus took it one step further, and his promise is phenomenal. He says people who orient their lives around generosity are going to live happier. They're going to be happy people. And that's a great promise that the Son of God made. They're actually happier. So last week, and again, we picked up the Canadians and the Europeans, so everybody's included. But we said this, that the thing that Americans, Canadians, and Europeans have in common as it relates to money is this word right here at the top of this chart, and that's the word worry. If you put that up, worry. And it's an incredible thing because the way we respond to our worry, we worry that we're not going to have enough to send our kids to college. We worry that we're not going to be able to afford the new car, or we're not going to be able to buy a house, or we may be worried that we're not going to be able to afford children. You won't ever be able to afford children. I shared the survey in the first service. The fact of the matter is that they say, and I found this out years after my kids were gone, and it's verifiably true, that from the moment that child is born until they graduate college, for a boy, I had a boy and a girl. Should say me and Sylvia had a boy and a girl. But from the moment that they leave your house and graduate college, for the boy, it's stated that you will statistically spend about $250,000 on that child before they get out on their own. And for a girl, that's about $14.2 million that you will spend on that girl. Okay, I fudged that last number just a little bit, but the other one was true. So here's the thing. We worry about all that stuff. If you'll put that back up, I'll walk you through it. And what happens as a result of all this worry of things that we're not able to do, we spend more than we make. We do the exact opposite. It's a cultural thing. We do the exact opposite of what we should do. Instead of figuring out a better plan, we respond to the lack of money or maybe not having enough margin in our lives by spending more than we make, which creates a debt problem, and then it creates no margin in our lives to be generous and rich toward God. And then it just creates more worry, and the cycle continues. We consume more than we make. We build up more consumer debt. We have none for the future consumption, no margin for future consumption. And again, it creates more worry, and the cycle continues, and it gets worse. And then we ultimately figure out this is a self-control problem. Right? We covered that last week. And then our debt issues is a contentment issue. You know, it's a contentment issue, and we always want more, the newest, the latest, the greatest, and all that stuff. And then the no margin thing, that's a discipline problem. And again, all of that compounds, and it causes us to worry, and it's just an endless cycle that just wears us out. And folks, I said to you last week, this right here is a special kind of crazy that most people in this country, in Canada and Europe, and most Christians ascribe to this kind of a living, and it's a special kind of crazy, and that's how we live in our society. People who live in this crazy cycle, they think, well, if it comes to me and I get my hands on it, it must be for me. It's got to be for me. This is where we left off last week. Generous people do not assume it's theirs to consume. So now, the way to get out of this crazy cycle is by reordering and reprioritizing your finances. You break the cycle not by making more money. More money does not fix your problem. Again, we covered this as well, because getting your hands on more money does not deal with the issues of self-control, contentment, or discipline. Hard to say amen to that, but we all know it's true. Jesus is trying to teach us that the only way off the crazy highway is take the off-ramp marked generosity. It breaks the crazy cycle. So you prioritize your life around generosity rather than consumption. So we gave you a great definition of generosity, and this is it: the premeditated, calculated, designated emancipation of personal financial assets. And again, generous people understand just because it comes to me doesn't necessarily mean it's for my consumption or for my only use. That's how generous people live. They want to find a hurt and heal it, find a need and fill it, and try to give and be generous. So let's start with that word premeditated that you just saw up there. And in order to be generous, you must have a plan. Generosity requires a plan. Say that with me. Generosity requires a plan. Now, you weren't very into that, so let's say it again, and let's put a little something in it. Here we go, one more time. Generosity requires a plan. Amen. Now, somebody pushes back, and they say, well, PT, I'm not really a planner. Yes, you are. You just don't know it. You are a planner. You have a plan because you have established financial habits. You have established financial habits. If you have financial habits, you have a plan. You've just never written it down. So we could follow you around and, in the course of your week and watch everything you do and then write all of your habits financially down. And then at the end of the week, we're not going to do this, by the way, but in the end of the week, we could hand you a list of things that you did through the week, things that you repeated financially over and over again, and we could say to you, this is your plan, because we all have a plan. And it's not always necessarily a good plan. For most of us, in fact, it's a very bad plan. If you do not know what your plan is, it's a bad plan because human nature tends to ignore or to avoid our dysfunction, our personal dysfunction. We don't like to think about how dysfunctional or how crazy that we actually are. We don't mind talking about somebody else's crazy, right? I'm a Facebook stalker. I know what you do. And we don't mind talking about somebody else, but we don't want to address our own dysfunction. So, we'd rather think about our strengths and ignore our weaknesses. And that's just how this nature is. It's how we're wired. Now, if you don't know what your financial plan is, things are probably not very good for you financially. The problem is, whether it's a good plan or a bad plan, you are working a plan, one or the other. You just haven't written it down. So let me tell you what your plan is if you've never written it down. We're going to walk through this and make some good points. If you are someone who lives with the assumption that everything you get your hands on is for your consumption, here is your plan, and it's a bad plan. You consume, you save if you can, and you'll give a little bit if there's anything left over. That's not a good plan, but that's your plan. Consume pretty much everything that comes your way. Save if I can. And if there is anything left over, I'm going to throw a little random act of giving out there, for a cause that catches my attention from time to time. So this is a bad plan. It's a bad plan. Your plan is to consume everything, try to save some, and give what's left over. That makes you what we're going to call a 3S giver. Spontaneous, sporadic, and sparingly. We give spontaneously, sporadically, and sparingly. 3S givers. Let's talk about that. If somebody tells a sad story about an orphan, an orphanage that has a whole bunch of orphan children in it, and I've been to one and it just broke my heart, or a family who lost everything in a tragedy, then I'll give spontaneously if the story moves me. And then there's sporadic. That's usually sporadic when we do those kind of things, kind of here or there, and it's always sparingly because we're not in a position where we can be real generous toward those needs, so we try to find a few crumbs from our budget that we can spare, and we toss that into a random act of giving. If you ever hope to get off the crazy highway, okay, you've got to become a generous person, and to become a generous person, you must have a plan. I sound like Dave Ramsey up here, but I'm not Dave Ramsey. Much better looking than Dave Ramsey. But you've got to have a plan, okay? The thing is, generosity requires a plan. So you've got to have a plan, and that's the premeditated part. That's my plan. You get a plan. You think about it ahead of time. You put something in place. That's the plan. Now, let's go back to the definition of generosity, and we'll carry through the cycle. The premeditated, calculated. Let me explain to you why that we put that word in this definition. Calculated. Generosity requires a specific amount or percentage. You think you know where I'm going with this? You do not. You just don't know. So hang in there with me. You need to know ahead of time, how much am I going to give and what percentage of my income am I going to give away? Now keep in mind that determining a percentage is better, because as you make more, you give more, and you become a more disciplined, generous person. A lot of people get freaked out about percentage giving. A lot of Christians push back. A lot of people that are checking out churches, we have to talk about this once a year, which is pretty much what we do. And I always, it's not that I hate seeing visitors come in on days like this. I hate for them to come in and catch it in the middle and not get how that Cross Point Church approaches this whole thing of giving. So I'll try to tie up all the loose ends and at least make it, help it to make a little bit of sense. But a lot of people are freaked out by percentage giving. In other words, we don't have a problem with the entry-level stuff. If you make $100 and you decide to give a percentage, 10%, and you give $10, we can do that, not much skin off our backs, right? But then when you make $1,000, that $100, it's like prying that out of your cold, dead fingers. It's like just hard to let it go because it's got more zeros attached, right? It's a challenge, and it's really hard to just let it go, and it gets in our head, and we start figuring out, man, this is crazy. Here's the thing. For some reason, once the zeros start adding up, we freak out. And we're going, oh my God, it's so much money. It's so much money. It's a percentage, okay? And I'm talking to Christian folk here today. If you're not a Christ follower, we would never hold somebody that's not a Christian to a Christian standard. I'm talking to Christian people today, and we don't expect people that are first-time guests nor people that don't ascribe to Christian teachings to live up to this. I'm talking to the Christian folk in the house, and you can eavesdrop on a tough conversation. Those are always fun. So you can just, listen in. But it's a percentage, and generous people give percentages. That's how generous people think, because generous people want to give more as their income goes up. They have they predetermined to give more, and the best way to do that is by picking a percentage. It's not spontaneous, it's not sporadic, and it's not given sparingly. You're able to give, and percentage is the best. Now, here's what generous people do, and this is my challenge to you. Generous people give it before they consume it. They give it before they consume it. See, the key to generosity isn't just giving more. The key to generosity isn't just having a plan. The key to generosity is reordering or reprioritizing your finances, turning a bad plan into a great plan. I'm going to give you one, and then we'll talk about it, where you give first. You just kind of flip the order. You give first, you save second, and you live on the rest. You give first, you save second, and you live on the rest. That would make you a 3P giver, not a 3S giver. You're giving a percentage, it's a priority. That means you give it first, and you pick a percentage beforehand, and then it's progressive. Now, let me set you up for this. I'm not asking for anything from anybody here today, okay? There's no hook, there's no tricks in this sermon. I'm not going to give you a sad story and try to get into your pocketbook or your checkbook today, okay? We're not all about that at all. But preachers that I've shared this with about Crosspoint Church, they don't like the way I teach this. I have a lot of pastor friends, and they go, I would never preach that in my church. And they think I'm wrong. The truth is they're wrong, and I'm right. Because they don't know Crosspoint Church. And I think each situation merits attention based on what's going on in that demographic of people. And at Crosspoint, it's a unique place. It really is. And when I say that, let me give you a little background, especially if you're a guest here today. About 60% of our church is comprised of people who have never gone to church before. They've just started coming since we've been on this campus right here. They've never gone to church before, or they've been out of church. When they got out from under mom and dad's house, mom and dad used to force them to go to church. They went to college and they didn't go to church, and then they got out of college, got married, and they didn't want anything to do with church then. And now they've heard about a church like this, and they've started leaning back in, and they've become engaged with the church, and they like what they see, and it's fresh, and it's alive, and it means something. It has some content to it, and it's genuine, and it's real, it's authentic, it's transparent, all that stuff that you love about Crosspoint, and it's a good thing. But there's a lot of people that have been away from church or never been in church that attend this church. So they've been away for all these years, and they come back to a church like this, and they start leaning into faith. And then they hear about all this stuff that we're doing through the many ministries of our church, and the things that we're doing in the Dominican and Ukraine and Hungary and through Inasmuch and all these other things that we're really excited to be a part of. And they realize, all of a sudden, they go, well, I don't have enough margin in my life to do that. I can't afford to tithe. That's 10%. I can't do that. So I tell all these people, and this is where my pastor buddies don't like me, okay? I tell all these people, while you're working hard, a Dave Ramsey kind of a lifestyle, whatever you want to do, while you're working hard to create more margin in your life, why not take some baby steps toward becoming the more generous person that God is calling you to be? In other words, if you came to faith with no margin in your financial budget and you can't tithe because you've never been in church before and it's just, you never planned on giving or anything like that, then you start somewhere and pick a percentage and get a plan in place. Start with a smaller percentage. I'll give you some biblical numbers. You can start with 3%. There's some Bible in there about that. 5% or 7%, okay? Start somewhere. Those are biblical numbers. 40 is also a biblical number if you want to just... Nobody ever... Yeah, anyway. So you become generous by choosing to be a percentage giver. You prioritize and you give it first, and then over time you increase it. It's progressive, okay? So a lot of our people at Crosspoint, we offer no condemnation. We just say, hey, pick a percentage and start somewhere. Get on a plan of generosity, and every year as you see God doing incredible things in your life, raise it from 3 to 4 or from 2 to 3 or whatever that you do, and watch what God will do. And look, I know that I'm going to get these texts and these emails, and these preachers always say, well, that's not tithe. I ain't talking about tithe. I'm talking about percentage giving. Start somewhere and watch what God will do when you start becoming a generous person. He'll open doors in your life you never dreamed or imagined possible. We've seen it and heard the stories over and over and over again. So I always talk about percentage giving in a church environment like Crosspoint. It's where you got to go. I mean, it's just the way things are. So you calculate how much and how often. You're working out a plan. So that's the calculate part. How much am I going to give and how often am I going to give it? That's very important. Now we come to the fun part. We come to the fun part. It's premeditated. It's calculated. And it's, let's go back to the definition. Now it's designated. This is the fun part. You get to decide where you're going to give it. You get to pick and choose, and it's not what you think. You think you know what I'm going to say. Zip it. You don't know what I'm going to say. I'm going to blow your mind here in just a moment. I'm going to say a little bit of what you're expecting, but I'm going to throw you a curveball because you need to hear what Jesus had to say about the whole thing. So we come to the designated part. That means you choose ahead of time. You get to choose where it's going to go, okay? Now, Jesus tells us, he gives us a strong indicator of where our money should go as far as the generous part of our money. This is what Jesus said, and I love this. And we've covered this a little bit. We're going to cover a little bit more today. He said, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So let's break that down. What is he actually saying? He was simply saying, where you send your money, you're also sending a piece of your heart with it. Because your heart chases after your treasure. Your heart's always going to, this works both ways. If you want to change where your heart is, then change where you're sending your money because your heart will follow your treasure. True generosity is designated, okay? That means you pre-decide where you're going to give. Don't get me wrong. You can still do random acts of giving. I do. You should. Random acts of giving all the time. But what makes you generous is that you are on a plan. It's not random. You're on a plan. You picked a percentage. You're giving that first. And you've decided ahead of time where you're going to give it. Now, one way of thinking about this is like this. Saving is how you say yes to you, okay? But generosity is how you say yes to what's important to you. Now, we've all been in the difficult situation where we wanted to do more and we just couldn't do more. Our hands were tied. We didn't have any margin in our life. We saw a cause that broke our heart and we wanted to do something, but we were in a position where we could not do anything. And we've all been there and we're going, oh, I wish I could help with that. I wish I could help with that. But there's a reason. I'm talking to me. Remember, I've made some astounding confessions during this series, and I asked if I could talk about some of you, and you keep saying no, so I had to keep telling my story because you don't want me to tell yours. But the thing is, it's not a money problem that you have no margin in your life. It's a self-control problem, it's a discipline problem, and it's a debt problem. But you're about to become a generous person if you just start with some basics that we're covering today and get on a plan. So where should you give? Let's cover that and then we'll move on quickly. Here's how to choose where to give. Here's how to choose your designation, not what you're expecting, a little bit of what you're expecting, but not at all the whole package. Two things. You give from a grateful heart and you give from a broken heart. You give from a grateful heart and you give from a broken heart. Now, I got this dry mouth thing going on, so this is where you say amen. I don't like talking about money. Makes me nervous. If you could stand up here and see you, you would be nervous too. Now, here's the thing. You give from a grateful heart and you give from a broken heart. Jesus said this. Your heart will always chase your money, and your money will always follow your heart. Your heart and your money forever intertwined. Forever intertwined. I say this all the time. It's not a popular little thing that I say, but it's true. If you show me your check register, I can tell you after looking at it what's important to you and the things in your life that you love. Because your money chases your heart, and your heart chases your money. They're intertwined. You get that, right? So it's true, and it is what it is. So we give from a grateful heart and we give from a broken heart. In other words, what are you grateful for and what are you broken over? What are you grateful for? What are you broken over? Sylvia and I settled this issue a long time ago. We're grateful. We have grateful hearts for Crosspoint Church. Our whole life is tied up in this. We want this to succeed and change people's lives and help people in an amazing way. So that's easy for us. We're going to give here, obviously. And then, our hearts are broken we've made a connection in the Dominican Republic in a little village there where we're rebuilding houses, and that people are living in tin shacks. And I see a lot of my mission partners that are here that's been with us over there, and y'all are going without me this year, and I ain't happy at all about it, but you're going. And there's something over there that broke my heart. My heart was just shattered. Last year when we walked down that hill, Hannah, we went into that little house, and it was not much of a house at all. It broke my heart, and every time I go, my heart gets broken. And so we have predetermined what we're going to do for Crosspoint and what we're going to do for the Dominican, and it's a lot more than what the Old Testament recommends for us to give, because we have been able to find room in our life and create margin where we can be generous and be rich toward God in that way. So to designate your generosity, you've got to decide ahead of time to fund the things that you're grateful for and fund the organization or the cause that addresses a need that breaks your heart. Now, you would expect me to say that, to say anybody who's grateful for and loves their local church should give to the local church. And look, I stand here guilty as accused. I believe that. But what you aren't expecting me to say is this. Okay, this is where I'll throw you a curveball. If you don't love your local church enough to give to it, go find one that you can fall in love with and support that church with your generosity. Okay? If I'm not happy somewhere, and I've had people come into my office and say, PT, y'all don't do this, you don't do this, and I'm used to this, and I'm used to that. And I say, look, this is who we are. I'm just being honest with you. That's not the church we are. You're looking for a more traditional church, and there's no ill feelings here. This isn't doing it for you. I can recommend some. I got some great pastor friends in the community, and that's more in line with what you're looking for. And we're going to bless you and send you on your way, and we're going to pray for you, and you'll always be welcome to drop in on occasion. But if you don't love your local church and you're not grateful for it in such a way that your treasure follows your heart in being grateful, you need to find a place that you can feel good about and love enough to support and be generous toward. Okay? In addition to your church, this is where preachers go, I can't believe you teach that. In addition to your church, you should pick a cause that creates emotion in you. A charity that's doing something significant in the world. You should find something that focuses on a specific need that breaks your heart. Find an organization outside of the local church that addresses something that just crushes your soul. Get involved with and support some of the local charities. I recommend Inasmuch if you don't have a clue. What a great organization. And they're making a difference. They're feeding the homeless and sheltering the homeless, and we need that in Fayetteville. And a group of our people went over, and we have regulars from Crosspoint that's there every week. They're passionate about it. They're connected, and they're vested in it. It breaks their heart, so they're giving back in that way. Find something you can feel that way about. And give to that cause. We hope when you get involved with some of the local charities that you'll get emotionally engaged in what they're doing, and you will give to them. Amen. But Pastor Tracy, aren't you afraid that the people in your church will give to those organizations rather than to your church? No, I'm not afraid of that. I'm trying to teach you how to be generous. And generous people give from a grateful heart and from a broken heart. This series is about teaching Crosspointers how to live and become generous people. I want to create a culture of generosity, and I found out a long time ago, I don't have to be afraid of what generous people are going to do with their money. I don't have to worry about that. If the people in our local congregation became generous like what we're talking about, there's about 800 people that calls this their home church. If we all got generous and we found something we were grateful for and something that breaks our heart, I promise you this, there'd be enough money to go around for everybody to fund the work that they're trying to do for God. If people just get a generous spirit about them. Now, everybody didn't believe that. But Jesus said this, generous people give from a grateful heart and they give from a broken heart. And Jesus said you can't separate your heart from your treasure. Wherever you send your treasure, your heart is going to follow. Here's another random thing that I just threw in here. It doesn't flow. It doesn't work with this sermon as far as to make it smooth. And I like things to flow, and I don't like gaps. And I got a gap here, but I didn't want to leave this out. Generous people don't feel guilty saying no because they have already said yes. Let me explain that because some of you don't get it. I said no just this past week to an incredibly great, worthwhile, and noble cause. Personally, I was approached, and I said no. And my first reaction was, doggone it, I'm the pastor. They're going to walk away from here going, well, he's not a very generous person. Here's what you need to understand, and this is what you need to know. And this is not just true for me, it's true for you. I said no to a great cause. Actually, somebody says, well, you're not very generous, but because I've already planned my giving, I live a generous lifestyle every day. I don't have to do random acts of giving to make myself feel generous. I'm on a plan. I have a plan. It works for me, right? And so I feel no condemnation to say no from time to time to a random act of giving. Sometimes I say yes to a random act of giving. We've done that recently. But I can say no because I've already said yes, and I have a plan for generosity. So now here's where we're going to kind of tie all this up and make it work. You're wondering if you're a first-time guest, does this guy ever talk about the Bible? We do. Let me throw a little Bible at you, okay? 2,000 years ago, the epicenter of activity for Christianity was Jerusalem. It was like the headquarters of faith. It's where Jesus lived and where the resurrection took place, and it was where the apostles all got together before they started spreading the gospel everywhere and just, taking it out to the ends of the earth. And the great apostle Paul was one of those guys who was traveling all around the Mediterranean rim outside of, the reach and the influence of Jerusalem. He went way beyond, and he started planting churches, and he planted and started those churches like I started and planted Crosspoint. So he had influence with a lot of people that were in those churches. They bought into his leadership, they liked his message, and they believed in what he was doing, and so he had influence with them, right? So things are about to change. They're about to take a turn, a very interesting turn. He's out there preaching the gospel of Jesus, the resurrected Savior of the world, and he's planting new churches everywhere. But over time, the Christians in the headquarters city of Jerusalem, where it all began, they became to be under intense persecution, and martyrdom was very common in Jerusalem. With the persecution that they were going through came discrimination, and they couldn't find work and they couldn't buy food, which meant that they were literally starving to death in the city, the capital city. They were starving to death in Jerusalem, the Christians were, because of the oppression. So Paul, he starts a crusade of generosity for the Christians that were in trouble in Jerusalem. So he's like, God has blessed the churches outside of Jerusalem, all these churches I've started. He said, I look and I see, and you guys are just blessed. You've got everything you need and then some. He says, you guys are doing great, but our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem, they're really struggling. They're in trouble. We need to find a way to help them. Thank you. So the new churches responded to that, and they were like this. Hey, Jerusalem is where it all began. Our Christian brothers and sisters there are the ones that gave us eyewitness accounts of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Christ. There's over 500 people that we've talked to that saw all this stuff happen. Eyewitness testimony. We need to help our brothers and sisters in Jerusalem under intense persecution. So the Apostle Paul says, okay, you're in, so here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan for how we're going to fix this problem and help those people who are in trouble, because Paul says we got to have a plan. So Paul's instructions to the Christians who had more than they needed but wanted to help those in need is the first mention we have of churches collecting money to help the less fortunate. He said this, now about the collection for the Lord's people. About the collection, let's talk about money. Nobody likes to talk about money. Paul says we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it right now. We got to deal with this. He said, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. He said, in other words, I've been out here sharing this plan with everybody, and the plan I'm sharing with you today is the same one that I'm sharing with them. I'm telling everybody the same thing. Let's get on this plan, okay? It's the same thing I told the Galatian churches to do. And now keep in mind here, this is a day and time. There was no auto draft. There was no text to give, no online checking, no online app, none of that stuff. But he continues, on the first day of the week, which is Sunday, each of you should set aside a sum of money. In other words, let me give you this plan. Okay, Paul, we want to help our persecuted brothers and sisters in Jerusalem. So how should we give? Should we wait until we hear a sad, compelling story about their persecution, until we get the latest details? And Paul goes, no, don't wait for that. Should we wait and see if they sing a new worship song that we like, and if we can keep beat with it, then we'll give to that? And Paul goes, no, don't base your giving on that. Well, should we wait to see if the preacher is going to stay within his 40-minute allotted time frame before we give? And Paul would say, no, you'll never give at Cross Point if you're waiting for that. You've got to have a plan. So here's what he says. Now, about the collection for the Lord's people, do what I told the Galatian churches to do. On the first day of the week, each one of you should set aside a sum of money in keeping with your income. That little phrase, in keeping with your income, it means to whatever extent one has prospered. So come on, Paul, give us a number. Just tell us, is it 2%, 3, 5, 7, 10? What is it? Nail this down for us. Land this plane. Just tell us what you expect of us, and that's what we'll do. And he's going, I can't tell you how to scale your giving. I can't do that. And a lot of preachers get really ticked off with me for this. When we post this, you ought to share it with every pastor friend you got just to get a rise out of them. They hate this because we're so traditional in our mindset, and we think Old Testament when it comes to tithing, and we don't think New Testament. But I'm telling you, if they could get this principle and understand what Jesus was saying, the church wouldn't want for anything. It would blow up like nobody's business, and we could carry the gospel to the ends of the earth. It would be a powerful, powerful thing. He says, we're saying, Paul, tell us, we want to regiment this, and we want to do this exactly like you want us to do it. And he says, I'm not going to tell you exactly what to give. He then kind of ties it all together. He says, you should give out of a grateful heart, and you should give out of a broken heart, because that's what Jesus was teaching. So how grateful are you? How broken are you over the persecuted Christians in Jerusalem that helped us propel the gospel and get Christianity launched and off the ground? Are you upset because they're starving and being persecuted and martyred and fed to the lions in the arena? Then out of gratefulness or out of a broken heart, give a measure that meets that need, and you become that kind of a generous person. So how grateful are you, he would say. Paul continues, saving it up so that when I come, and this is amazing, no collections will have to be made. He's going, I don't want to talk about this no more. He's like, I'm like PT, I don't want to preach about this all the time. So just get on a plan and stay on it, and then we don't have to talk about it no more. So when I get there, I don't have to tell a sad story to get you to give. I don't have to show slides of the poor, impoverished, skin and bones Christians that are struggling in Jerusalem. I won't have to coach you into a random act of kindness, because you will be on a plan and you will already have become generous people. I'm just saying. Paul says you'll have a premeditated, calculated, designated approach to giving, because that's what generous people do. They don't have to be asked. They don't have to be begged. They don't have to be shown a sad slide presentation. They have already predetermined their generosity. Okay, let's go back to our chart. So it's premeditated. That's your plan. You have a plan. You've calculated how much and how often, and it's designated. You've decided where you're going to give it, and you've decided based out of a grateful heart and out of a broken heart. And Jesus tied all that together for us. That's what generosity is. Generosity, if you'll go to that one, generosity is the premeditated, calculated, designated emancipation of personal financial assets. Here's an easy way to remember it. I said it, this is flipping everything that we used to do. Consume first, save if we can, and then give a little away if we can. We flip the script. Now it's give, save, live. This is a generous lifestyle. Give, save, and live. Give, save, live. You give first, you save second, and you consume the rest. Generous people live this way. Generous people live this way. Now, let me show you what happens when you take on this lifestyle. Because that crazy changes. That crazy lifestyle of worry and, consuming and spending more than you make, and all it changes. And here's what happens. Put that up. All of a sudden, the cycle of crazy is redefined. You've reprioritized. You've revamped your whole life. Now, instead of worry, you have peace. Right? Now, instead of giving it or consuming it all and spending more than you make, you're giving first, and then you're saving, and then you're living on the rest. And that cycle continues. You all of a sudden are becoming a generous person. You have peace because you're giving, saving, and then living. You're giving, saving, and then living. It's a powerful, powerful thing. And people look at this and they say, y'all crazy. Y'all crazy people. I mean, you give before you consume. You give before you save. You give first. That's crazy, man. And you look at them and you go, yeah, it's crazy. But it's the best kind of crazy. Because there's a lot of crazy out there. You know that's true. There's a lot of crazy out there. This is the best kind of crazy, okay? It's a lot better than the kind of crazy, it's a lot better than that crazy. Worry, spending more than you make, building up more and more debt, no margin, spiritual problem, self-control problem, contentment problem, discipline. That's a bad kind of crazy. Put the other one back up. This is a good kind of crazy. You've become a generous person. You give, you save, and you live on the rest. You give, you save, and you live on the rest. This is a better kind of crazy. And generosity breaks the crazy cycle. But this is a better kind. Okay? Now, you survived. You survived this series. You've got a plan. All you got to do is decide how you're going to work the plan. The details are up to you. You see, because in the New Testament, again, these guys don't like me to say this, but in the New Testament, Jesus didn't come along and say, you better give your 10%. No, he said, hey, here's what I want to tell you about it. Your heart will follow your treasure, and your treasure will always chase after your heart. So, what are you grateful for? What is your heart grateful for? And what breaks your heart? It all ties into your heart. And then, once you figure that out, you can decide what percentages that you're going to do. It's 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, 15, 20. Some of you are 20% people. Incredible. Okay? You figure that out. Now, in the first sermon of this series, let me finish this up and then we're done. I told you the story about me giving away my little Nissan pickup, but I need to correct that story. It wasn't a Nissan, it was a Datsun. Anybody remember Datsun? Okay, so I want to get my facts straight. Me and my dad had painted that little truck. I remember we painted it. I tried to find a picture of it. We painted it Burger King colors, two-tone, you know. And I liked the Burger King colors back on the sign back in the day. And we pinstriped it and did some nice stuff and put an aftermarket AC in it and Kenwood stereo system, nice tires, rims. I told you that whole story. And I gave it away, and God gave it back to me. And see, I got to thinking about that story, and I wanted to tie it into something more spiritual than what I did the first time around. So let me make this a little bit more spiritual. I was just like Father Abraham, who was asked to sacrifice his son Isaac on the altar. God stopped him at the last minute so that he didn't have to kill his son. God was testing him to see if he was willing to sacrifice his son. Well, I figured, here's the way I tie it in. God was testing me to see if I was willing to sacrifice my little Datsun pickup truck. Okay, it's not the same thing. It's not even close. But sometimes God does test us. He does test us, and he does put us to the fire. And then some years later, remember I told you the story, God spoke to my heart to give away all the money in our savings account, and we didn't have much money back in those days. We'd finally built up a little nest egg, and we felt good about it. And I went to hear a missionary in Rocky Mount, North Carolina from Greece, and he got up and showed these slides that broke my heart, and it was a random act of giving, but I gave all of my savings away, all of our savings away. And called Sylvia to get permission to do that, and so we did that. And in the back of my mind, I'm remembering that little Datsun pickup truck, and I'm going, well, God gave that back to me. Maybe he'll give this money back to me somehow. He didn't. He kept it all. He kept every dime. Sometimes he does that, and he's like, psych, got ya. Yeah. My point is this. Generosity is a lifestyle. It's not a random act every now and then. A few weeks ago, my wife has been doing a phenomenal job. We're on a real disciplined lifestyle now where, she's looking fabulous and doing a great job. And her old winter coat, we had those real low degree days down into 7, 8 degrees, and it was so cold, and she says, I don't have a coat. I said, well, let's just go shopping. Let's go get you a coat. We can do that. We got enough room. We can go buy you a nice coat. Well, we went all around town, and she'd look at the price tag. I ain't paying that for that coat, And so finally we I say, we go home. She couldn't find anything she was willing to, pay for it. I said, look, Amazon, let's get on Amazon. I love Amazon. And so I got her on the Amazon, and I typed in the right words to get it, the search engine to pull up all these coats. And then I took my laptop, and I just sat in her lap. I said, now pick out a coat. It'll be here. I'm Amazon Prime. 2 days. 2 days. Free shipping. Woohoo! Yes. Amazon Prime, free shipping. So, I'd already told her, I said, get a nice coat. Get a leather coat. We can afford that. Get a $400 or $500 coat that's going to last you the rest of your life. And my wife, she sat over there for about an hour. I knew what she was doing before I ever saw. She was finding the most practical, cheap coat she could find that would still serve the purpose. So she said, I found it. I put it in the cart. So I look in the cart. It's a $75 coat. And she wears that thing around like it's that $500 leather jacket. Happy to have it, paid $75 for it, 2 days shipping, right? It's a good way to go. I tried to coach her. Let me spend a little money on you, baby. Come on. I don't want that. This is going to work just fine. Because she's already acclimated to having margin, and she don't want to give that up, okay? So, a few days later, now I'm back to being tested, right? My brother calls. He said, Tracy, we've been talking about this cruise that we're taking this summer for a couple of years. You said you was going. I've emailed you the travel agency's name. You need to call them. And he said, we're going to do 8 days. Me and Annette, you and Sylvia, and Micah and Kathy, which is Marissa's godparents. And we're all going to go have a good time. My brother's my best friend. Love him. And Micah Vaughn is who we named our son after, just real close to our family. And we vacation together on occasion. So my brother sends me this email, true story. I open the email, 8-day cruise to the Caribbean, and he's coaching me. He prompted me before I got the email. He goes, look, I know how you are. You need to decompress. You need to get away a couple times a year. You get stressed out, and you always function at a higher level when you take the breaks like you're supposed to take, and just get away and let Mike and Josh and your staff, let them worry about that. So he coached me up. And so I got the email, and I opened the email, and the bottom number's what I immediately went to. I didn't look at the itinerary. I didn't look at, we're going to Aruba. I found that out. Or they're going to Aruba. Let me finish this story. And I looked at the bottom number, and it was $2,400 for 2 people. And because Sylvia's claustrophobic, she's got to have a balcony. She can go out and chill, But things have changed. We hadn't been on a cruise in 4 years. And I looked at that, and I told her, I said, good gracious, I thought they were shopping, bargain shopping here. This is $2,400. And she's like, I don't know. I'd rather go somewhere and, spend a week with my grandson and spend that kind of money. I'm getting all that. And I'm going, but I promised him I was going to go. We really need to try to do this. We hadn't spent any time with him the last couple of years, and it's always good to get away. And I'm riding around town in my little stripped-down Toyota Tacoma that don't have power seats, heated seats, air-conditioned seats, remote start, none of that stuff, okay? Nice little truck. And I'm riding around that little truck, kind of a tight fit for a tall guy. And we actually get down here to the Hardee's where they're building this, on Hope Mills Road, where they're building that big gas station. And we're turning back down the road, going by, is it Lincare over there, whatever, or Apria, or did I get it right? Anyway, what's that road? Anybody know? Is that Cumberland? It's an extension that carries you over or something, I guess. Anyway, we're on that road, and it's like an epiphany. I go, okay, I'm driving this little truck. I got rid of a top-of-the-line Ram truck to get a little margin in my life. And I'm talking to her, and I'm going, I'm struggling, but I'm going to have to call Greg, and I'm going to have to tell him I can't take that cruise with you because the margin that I've created in my life to be able to give more and be more generous toward the things that break my heart and the things that I'm grateful for, I can't do that and fill it right back up for 8 days and pay for it, over 12 months or however long we was going to try to make it happen, if we was going to go. And I tell her this. I said, I can't feel good about the margin I've created and then putting a cruise back in that margin and not having that margin in my life. And I thought she was going to try to give me a standing ovation in the little cab of that little Toyota pickup truck. She's like, yes, yes, yes. So I had to call my brother. And I said, man, I'm sorry. Actually, I texted my brother. It's a lot easier. You know, the kids won't answer the phone, but they'll answer a text. So I thought, they pull it off, why can't I? So here we go. I texted my brother. I said, Greg, I'm so sorry. We can't go. We've made some changes, and we've trying to do more at the church, and we've got a building program, all this stuff going on. And I said, so I'm going to have to bow out. And this was the reply text he sent to me. That's all he said. You are dead to me. And I haven't heard from him since. So I think I'm actually dead to him. Okay? But here's the thing, and here's what I'll finish with this. When you order your life around generosity, it affects every sphere of your life. Now, here's the thing. I would love to go on a cruise this summer, my brother. I really would. Sylvia could have bought a much more expensive coat that probably would have lasted a lot longer. We could do that because we're capable of doing that, but we couldn't give this year out of grateful and broken hearts had we done that. So for us, that's more than 10% of our income, and it's important to us to be able to do that because that's our plan, it's our priorities. Just because it comes to us doesn't mean it's for us. And I hope that you can learn to live this way. It's a wonderful way to live. That you have to reel yourself in from time to time. And the thing is, I got to thinking, I said, well, shoot, we can go to south of the border. You know, looks nice from the road. They go down there, have a little honeymoon getaway for a day. You know, we can figure something out for a lot less than $2,400. Whatever you got to do, you know, you're just figuring it out. She says, well, stay home. She'd rather just stay home and play with the baby. But I hope you learn to live this way too. There's nothing else that compares. And I hope you'll get on a plan to become a generous person and at least try to live a life of peace. A different kind of crazy. Certainly, put that up for me if you will. That crazy chart, the worst one. You can live like this with worry and consuming more than you make and debt and no margin in your life and never get off that cycle. Or you can live like this. You can have peace by giving, saving, living on the rest. Giving, saving, living on the rest. And look, again, I'm going to tell you, there's no plea here for you to give. We're not taking up building fund pledges. None of that junk, okay? I'm telling you, you give out of a grateful heart, whatever that looks like, whatever percentage and wherever that falls, and you give out of a broken heart, and you will be on a plan to become a generous person. That's the best kind of crazy. So here's the deal. You get to choose your crazy. And some of you already have. Amen. And you're loving the life that you're living. Give, save, live. Jesus says if you want to be happy, do this. If you want to be happy in this life, do this right here. Give, save, and live. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? Father, we love you. Thank you for the rain. Thank you for your blessings, the mercy and grace of God. Thank you for helping us to be the people that you've called us to be. This is environment. This is a heart-driven church. We're going to live out of the abundance of our heart. We're going to honor God first. Lord, you're not after our money. You want our heart. You just happen to know that our hearts tends to chase after the money trail. And God, you want our heart. You don't need our money. So help us, Father, to be the people that reprioritize, reorder our lives around generosity. Let this church be the most generous church in the state of North Carolina, that we're always making a difference, reaching out to do more, and we'll give you the praise for it in Christ's name.